Okay, now I know I say this too much. I've said this a bunch of times. I'm starting to sound like Eichmann, but this is another one of my favorite topics. Nietzsche is someone that you either love or hate. For example, in my case, I both love and hate this guy. He is absolutely brilliant, but I hope he's wrong. I hope people like me, wait, I'm not that important. I hope that people like Fromm or Singer are right, and I hope Nietzsche's wrong, but if we're all wrong, right, if there is no goodness in human nature, if there is no morality at the base of our instincts, if the universe really can't be trusted and there's no meaning in it, then Nietzsche's right. I hope he's not, but that is plan B. All right, so first start. Notice how I pronounced his name. I do not pronounce German well. I've never studied much of it except the grammar. But, right, let's just say it this way. We will say it as Nietzsche. That's pretty close to what I hear German people say. Just don't say Nietzsche, right? That annoys the nerdy people about Nietzsche. And, just to say this, plenty of people love Nietzsche. So you will really piss people off if you mispronounce his name. Now, who loves him? If you are in the alley behind the Frontier restaurant down near UNM and you see people dressed all in black giving themselves tattoos and chain smoking cigarettes, you have some Nietzsche fans, right? He is really popular with the most disgruntled people in our society, and they have a point. Good. So let's start Nietzsche with how important he was as a historical figure, because he is one of the most radical thinkers in all of history. Well, what is he most famous for? Saying, and this is said in, what would this be, about 1883, I'm guessing? Famous words, God is dead. How well did that go over in the 1880s? Oh, people hated him. So, let's talk a little bit about his life. Let's first start with the controversies. There were two myths that were often believed about Nietzsche, and I'll tell you why they were believed. The first myth is that his ideas, like the idea that God is dead, drove him crazy. His ideas were incredibly radical, yes, but people think that these thoughts, or maybe even God cursed him, drove him nuts. Did Nietzsche go crazy? Yes. Actually, right now, pause this video and look up pictures of Nietzsche, because I want to say something about him. You will see some famous pictures of him dressed in his black suit with his humongous mustache. Okay, now, scroll down a little farther, right? Go back and look at this, and you will see really awful pictures of him dying. The most fascinating things about those pictures, right, are two things. First, in some of those pictures, he's barely conscious. If you look closely, his eyes are caving in and he's kind of googly-eyed. Sorry, not like Sartre, not from birth, but this is toward the end of his life. And so some of the most famous pictures of him that are pictures that people think, oh, here's Nietzsche at his heyday, are actually him being propped up while he's actually nearing death. He is writing tons and tons of books in the 1880s and the early 1890s, and he dies at 1900. Some of these pictures are from the mid-1890s, and he has already lost it. What you will find is you will find pictures of Nietzsche as Superman, right? Maybe we'll talk about that. And Nietzsche with a horse, or at worst, with a horse, and if you keep scrolling, you'll see porn, so stop. Good? You'll see Nietzsche as a horse, or with a horse, because one of the last things he was ever seen doing was, now get this picture, he is on the city streets and someone is whipping a horse because the horse won't go. Now, before cars, you took horses and carriages everywhere. And so it was pretty standard. Nobody cared about animal rights in this day. So this guy is whipping a horse because it won't move. And what does Nietzsche do? Now, Nietzsche is already going really nuts at this point. What does he do? He steps between the man and the horse, takes a couple of the lashes himself, and says, "How dare you hurt this poor horse?" And he wraps his arms around the horse. Now, this is fascinating because Nietzsche hated everyone. Nietzsche couldn't get along with anyone. He only had friends for short periods of his life. This is the last public thing that Nietzsche ever did. After that, he was bedridden and insane. And it is not his ideas that drove him crazy. So let's settle the myth. It was, wait for it, untreated syphilis. So here's a little public service announcement. Please wear your Jimmy hats. Syphilis and these kinds of diseases, sexually transmitted diseases, are no joke. They quite literally will melt your brain if they're untreated. And so this one is what happened to Nietzsche. I'm pretty sure it was his fondness for prostitutes, but I don't want to speculate too much. But he went crazy because of untreated syphilis. Now, let's put the other myths together with this one. The other myth is that Nietzsche was what we'll call a proto-Nazi, meaning that there aren't any such things as Nazis yet, right? The Nazis will rise to power and make a name for themselves still 20 years after he's dead. But it's this idea that he would have been a Nazi if it existed. So watch how these two myths overlap. As he is dying, he is publishing notes for his last great book that is going to be called The Will to Power. Now, before he goes crazy, he is producing book after book, and these things are amazing. They're not fun to read, but the ideas are absolutely flooring, right? If you can read, say, Beyond Good and Evil or Genealogy of Morals, those are good ones. Those can be read. The others are really hard to read and no fun, but the ideas are just overpowering when you do get them. So, what's happening? Now, Nietzsche is not a Nazi, but his brother-in-law and his sister are proto-Nazis. And so what are they doing? They are taking notes and excerpts from this book he is planning that's going to be his big master work at the end of his life called The Will to Power. And notice, even that title sounds very Nazi-esque. They are taking excerpts of his notes and publishing them as if he is still writing them. He is pretty much a vegetable at this point, but what do? They prop him up in bed and publish these photos so that people think he is still alive and well and producing these proto-Nazi styles of propaganda. Now, to be clear, he does hate everyone. So if you look at excerpts from any of his books, and especially the notes from Will to Power, you will find all sorts of things that are very hateful against the Jews. But turn the next page and he's hateful against the Christians. Turn the next page and he's hateful against what? German nationalism. He thinks anyone that takes our identity from the country they happen to be born in is a complete moron and they should die. Yes, he uses this kind of language. So he hates everyone, and you can find hateful things about every group you want to imagine. So what do the brother-in-law and sister do? Just publish those pieces that are against the Jews and making it sound like he's all for this new thing that will soon be the Nazi party. Now, let's say one more thing about his life, because he is often misunderstood in this way as well. Let's treat this as a fun little topic of how to be a radical. I know many of you would love to be a radical, make a name for yourself for being a revolutionary person in whatever your field is. Maybe it's in philosophy, maybe it's in politics, or maybe it's in music or art. Now, here's the problem. Let me give you a quick how-to set of bullet points for how to be a radical person in history and in your field. There's a problem, because how do you become a radical thinker and person? You have to be a nerd first. I am sorry, there is no shortcut. You have to study and study. You have to practice your craft, and only then can you be great and have a real big impact. There's no shortcut. Nietzsche, in fact, was one of the biggest nerds ever. He only became a radical later after he was a serious nerd. His field was actually what's called the classics. Now, this is one of my little sub-disciplines. One of my degrees has a concentration in the classics. What is this? This is the field of study of ancient literature, languages, and ideas. Now, let me paint a little aside of how nerdy people in the classics are. First, where do you find books on the classics? They are literally in the basements of libraries. So these people are used to living in a world that has no windows or sunshine, and they look like it. Let me paint another picture. When I was taking my oral examinations for my concentration in classics over at Boston College, now notice what this means. This means that I had to sit in a room and be grilled like an interview, but with several advanced scholars in the classics. And in order to get that part of my master's degree, I had to pass this exam, this interview. Here's my favorite part. Oh, this is crazy. one of the classics professors was asking me a question about, let me remember, Augustine. Asking me a question about Augustine's City of God. And as he is talking, and by the way, he is the classic nerd in the classics. He literally has a tweed jacket with elbow patches, if you could imagine. He really does. All it's missing is a pipe, right? Didn't have a pipe that day, but I'm sure he had one. Anyway, he's asking me this question, and like most classics, right, classicists, he is a very mousy, quiet little voice. And I can't hear him. He is sitting in the front row of desks, so I lean forward to try to hear what he's saying because he's barely audible. And what happens when I lean forward? He literally screamed and jumped back because a regular human was going to get close to him. It was the best. That is how people in the classics are. Now here's Nietzsche. Nietzsche was such a profound scholar at a very young age. He was in this day, one of the youngest people to ever have a full professorship. And what was his concentration? Latin and the classics and ancient history. And he was already a full professor at the age of something like 24. In that day, that is just incredible. So, sorry for those of you who want to be radical without doing your homework. It really can't be done. You have to be a nerd first. All right, okay, I obviously need to calm down, but it is really fun to teach this stuff. Right, so that your notes can be organized, let me go really low tech right here, right? I know I've been doing my little charts and my little drawings, which are trying to be tech, but let me be even more low tech here. In order to make it really efficient in taking your notes and in order to organize what's going on, and yes, please make sure you're taking notes on these videos, here is the best way to organize your notes, right? So here is a little chart I'm going to show you, and please take notes in this sort of a format. Now, of course, leave room in each of these boxes. I would make this take up a whole page, so there's plenty of room for notes and little stories, right, that you can fill in. But please, mimic this sort of chart in your notes, and this is how I will be talking. I will be talking about, okay, now we're in this little part of the chart. Okay, so here is your chart. Let me hold this up. It is hideous because you know how bad my writing is. But here is how we will be thinking of Nietzsche. Is that framed okay? Good. All right, so get it? So we have a little chart. Master, slave morality, different categories, the two major columns, leave tons of room here, and we are going to fill in our chart using these 4 rows, looking at basic examples, looking at the origins of each style of morality, and then looking at how each defines good and bad. All right, is that enough time? Isn't that a great YouTube video, someone holding up a scribbled piece of paper? Wow, this is going to get all sorts of likes. All right, did you do it? Good. So let's first start with a little preface and fill in that first row. So we have master morality and slave morality. We'll read what Nietzsche says in a second, but I want to start with just some of your basic intuitions about this stuff. First, what are, and please, I would love it if you would talk to your screen, pretend you're talking to me, because I really miss you. Give me examples of major civilizations throughout history that you've heard of. Some of you with history backgrounds, yeah, you can go off right now and say, what are all the major civilizations in history? And think about them. And so right now you should be thinking about the Greeks, the Spartans, right, the Goths. You can be thinking about the Ming Dynasty, the English Empire, the American Empire, German Empire. We can go on, right? The Romans, right? Huge civilization. And you could keep going all the way through Huns, Celts, all sorts of things. Now, as you're thinking of that list of civilizations that we know about, right? Think, or guess, I guess, are these master morality civilizations or slave morality situations? Now, think about that list you just made. Let's see where they should go in our chart. We're not sure yet. Are these civilizations famous as having master morality or slave morality? Are these master morality civilizations or slave morality civilizations? Now, of course you can imagine what's going to happen now. These are all master morality civilizations. All the ones that we study are master morality types of groups. Now, of course, don't misunderstand. Are there plenty of slave morality people living in these civilizations? Sure. Who was doing all the work? When you think of ancient Egypt, and that one's easy to imagine because there's a bunch of cartoons about it. Now, of course, the slaves that are making the pyramids, they probably hold to slave morality. But is that what we study? Is that what we think about when we think about Egypt? No. We all think about the greatness, the powerful people who hold a master morality type of idea. So fill in your chart and simply write every civilization that we study. Those are the examples. Now, what are there more of in the world when you think of people? Are there more people practicing and thinking slave morality or master morality? Well, slave morality, of course, but we don't hear much from them. What are the master morality people doing? Oh, they're inventing mathematics and philosophy, they're writing music, they're building roads, making plumbing, right, building pyramids, right? What are the slave morality people doing? Well, sadly, they're just surviving. Where do they show up in history? Oh, a good example of this is read the Old Testament of the Bible. What do you find? Oh, well, a lot of the Old Testament, take the books of Kings, Judges, Joshua, is what? The Israelites, in this case a strange hybrid of a master morality society, killing all the slave morality people who are just surviving. And what do? They just live. What do the master morality people do? They invent, they create, and they destroy slave morality people and enslave them, obviously. So now let's start reading. So now let's go to the origin part of our chart and fill in going down origin, good, bad, for master morality first. So let me start reading. In a tour of the many finer and coarser moralities which have ruled or still rule on earth, I found certain traits regularly recurring together and bound up with one another, until at length two basic types were revealed and a basic distinction emerged. There is master morality and slave morality. And remember, again, he is not just making this stuff up, he is a serious scholar of ancient civilizations and ideas. And so he has done this work. He didn't do his work looking to be radical. He did the nerdy work and found all of these radical ideas just under the surface. So let's keep reading. So now I'm going to skip about 3 lines, so I'm about the 7th line from the top of the Nietzsche reading. The moral value distinctions have arisen either among a ruling order which was pleasurably conscious of its distinction from the ruled, or among the ruled, the slaves, and dependents of every degree. So, of course, now we've got the basics of our origins, but I want to say a lot more. So first, its origin could be an answer of who originated them, and that answer is really, really easy. Who was the original authors of master morality? Masters, rulers, powerful people. Who were the original authors of slave morality? Of course, slaves, peasants, dependent people. But I want to talk more about the origins in terms of the original ideas, not just who originated them, but of course, put the original authors in the chart. So let's talk. In the former case, when it is the rulers who determine the concept good, it is the exalted proud states of soul which are considered distinguishing and determine the order of rank. The noble human being separates from himself those natures in which the opposite of such exalted proud states finds expression. He despises them. It should be noticed at once that in this first type of morality, the antithesis good and bad means the same thing as noble and despicable. We need to say more about that. So first, when you're filling in your chart, you're going to say good means noble and bad means despicable. Absolutely fine, start that way. But that's really a vague notion. We need to fill it in. The antithesis good and evil originates elsewhere. So notice, go to your chart. So where in master morality it says good and bad, please make a little note that in slave morality, the idea of bad wasn't strong enough for the slave morality people. So they not only say people are bad, they say evil. So fill that in, right? In slave morality, it's not only bad in their chart, but they would call bad people evil. It's interesting. The cowardly, the timid, the petty, and those who think only of narrow utility are despised, as are the mistrustful with their constricted glance, those who abase themselves, the dog-like type of man who lets himself be mistreated. Now pause there for fun. Let me make it clear how crazy radical this is. When he says that line, Please imagine a historical figure that he could be talking about. Those who abase themselves, the dog-like type of man who lets himself be mistreated. Think about that. A good guess would be Gandhi. Yes, right? An even better guess would be who? A person that Nietzsche really can't stand. Jesus. What is Jesus? Someone that could be great, but he lowers himself and says, I am just like you poor people, and I care about you, and he lets people abuse him. What does the mass morality think of someone like that? They're terrible. What a weak moron. What a fool. How despicable can you be than to let yourself be abused by weak people? Damn. All right, let's read farther, and then let's fill in our chart. So skip a couple lines. Notice what it says. Quote, we who are truthful. Thus did the nobility of ancient Greece designate themselves. It is immediately obvious that designations of moral value were everywhere first applied to human beings, and only later and derivatively to actions, which is why it is a grave error when moral historians start from such questions as, quote, why has the compassionate action been praised, unquote. The noble type of man feels himself to be the determiner of values. He does not need to be approved of. He judges what harms me is harmful in itself. He knows himself to be that which in general first accords honors to things. He creates values. So, sorry, I had to read to the end before we could go back to the top of our chart and talk about origins, because notice what it's saying. The original authors of master morality were the masters and the powerful. But notice, what is the key idea that gives them their values? The idea that we are good and people unlike us are bad. So notice, the original idea was master people are better than the weak people, than the slaves, than the peasants. And so this idea of value, notice how he says it, is attributed to people, not to how you act. So make a note. You are good and bad because of who you are, not because of what you do. And so these distinctions between what is good and what is bad could be really closely, in most societies, distinctions of class. If you are upper class, powerful, rich, you are good. If you are lower class, a slave, a peasant, the masses, you are bad. And so notice this idea. Oh, here, let's try an ultimate test. When he is saying good means noble, he is saying the nobles. He is not saying that if you act with nobility, you are good. No. What is the worst thing in history that a peasant or a poor person could do? You will be locked in jail if you do this. What? Act as if you're noble. If you go around wearing purple, poor people aren't supposed to wear purple. If you drink your tea with your pinky out like the nobles do. In a lot of civilizations in history, you will be thrown in jail for impersonating what? A good person. You are a lowly, terrible person. So notice what it means. To say the bad person is despicable is just saying that. The noble people hate you. They despise you. Let's come up with a nice little word that still exists in our history. So, how would you talk about good people? Upper class, rich, noble, powerful, kings, rulers. People are good. What sort of people are bad? Here is the best word for it. The vulgar people are bad. Here is a word in our language that is actually an ancient word that we have brought up, but we have lost its original meaning, and we only appreciate its connotations. So think of what you think of when I say the word vulgar. What does vulgar mean? It means aggressive, it means rude, it means bloodthirsty, it means disgusting, vulgar. But what does it actually mean historically? Vulgar simply meant normal. In other words, vulgar was actually a placeholder for the masses of people, the common people, the poor classes. This is the vast majority of people on the planet, and it usually always was, that the masses were the vulgar class. They were the common people, and what did the noble think of them? Well, they are vulgar. They are disgusting. They are liars. They can't be trusted. Look at how incredibly disgusting they are. So you simply call them the masses. And that is a derogatory expression. They are vulgar. Now let's read after that break at the end of the page. A morality of the rulers is, however, most alien and painful to contemporary taste in the severity of its principle that one has duties only towards one's equals, that towards beings of a lower rank, towards everything alien, one may act as one wishes or, quote, as the heart dictates, and in any case beyond good and evil. It is here that pity and the like can have a place. So now let's put this together, because this is interesting. And now, by the way, little tangent. Who did that sound like right there? That idea that morality is a matter of the heart? Sorry, but it sounded like the libertarian Narveson. He talked that way. Your morality should be based on how you feel. It's a matter of the heart. If you like some people more than others, you like people that are close to you, then of course that's who you should worry about. Nietzsche is saying the same thing about master morality. You only have duties toward people like you. Masters only need to worry about other masters. They don't have to worry about the poor people, the vast majority of people on the planet. Now, of course, if you are a master, now, if you do give pity toward weak people, well, wow, you sure are a nice person. But this has nothing to do with morality. This is beyond good and evil. Now, notice, let me say some terrible things. In the book Slaughterhouse-Five, is that correct? Yes. In the book Slaughterhouse-Five, right, Vonnegut says this. He has some people sitting in a basement while they're hunkered down during the war. And some people from different countries are hunkering in this basement. And one of the people is an American. And they're asking the American about America, and they say this to him. Isn't America weird? You are the only society on earth that doesn't have stories praising poor people. No, of course, you have stories about poor people, but you only talk about them because they became rich. If they didn't become rich, you wouldn't even talk about them. Whereas every other civilization in history has great people who never became rich, but they were wise and good, and they were poor. America's weird. So now look at this. Think about some of our heroes. Think about it, the ways people praise people like Bill Gates or Oprah. I am so sorry. These are nice people. But they are only good because they became wealthy. And why do we praise them? Because they show pity for ordinary people. What does Bill Gates do? He is concerned for health care in poor countries like Africa. What does Oprah do? She gives away cars to ordinary people. Here's a car for you. What is this? This is someone that we love because they are masters. Don't mistake yourself. Don't get all weird, right? You know that you only love Oprah and Bill Gates because they're wealthy and powerful, because they are nobles. But why do we single them out? Because they're not only nobles, they have pity for the poor people, so they are our favorite nobles. We like them because we're nobles, but they also show pity. So now ask a little side question just to see if this makes sense. Can a peasant, can a slave ever be good in the morality way of looking at moral values? Can a slave ever be good? No, they can't, because they are not by definition bad. They are vulgar. They are peasants. They are by definition despicable. Now, we can derivatively, and this is how he talks about it, we can also talk about how people act, but notice, you are good because of who you are, and then you should act appropriately to the kind of person you are. So how does a good person act in master morality? Well, what are they like? They are proud. They strive for power. Ask this question. Is war good in master morality? Of course it is. Because what does war do? Now, I'm not talking about just a trivial sense about war as a way to grab more power. That's true. But we are talking about this idea of virtue. The idea of master morality works really well when you think of the virtues. And this is where it becomes hideous, that you were educated in a generation that thought we need to get back to virtues. Well, virtues are only at home in master morality, because now it's about the person. What makes you good? Not how you act, but who you are. If you have courage, if you have integrity, if you have loyalty, if you have honor, if you have bravery. Well, this is garbage when it comes to other forms of morality. It only works in master morality. Because what would someone, sorry, this is nerdy, what would someone like Kant say about virtues? He would say, they're only good if you have a good will with them. Because does being brave make you a good person? No. It could make you a good person, or it could make you a good soldier, but it could also make you a good rapist or thief. In other words, these are traits of excellence, but they don't necessarily make you a moral person. They just make you great at whatever you're trying to achieve. So, does a master morality love war? Of course, because it's how you prove your mettle. It's how you prove your worth, how you prove your bravery. Should the masses of people, should the majority of people like war? No. We are just imitating the powerful when we think we like war, but it does no good for us. And even if you're a master morality person and you prove that you're brave in war, you really did that for the master class, and you're just imitating them and doing what? No offense here, benefiting them. They have convinced you that we are so good that you should adopt our concerns. All right, sorry about that, but it's true. So now let's turn to slave morality. So let's go to the right side of our chart and let's read. I will start in the 5th line on page 2. It is otherwise with the second type of morality, slave morality. Suppose the abused, oppressed, suffering, unfree, those uncertain of themselves and weary should moralize. What would their moral evaluations have in common? So make a big note here. Master morality comes first. It is only after people are suffering at the hands of the masters that they invent their own morality. So yes, the authors of the original ideas here of slave morality are slaves and peasants or people being oppressed. Let's continue. What would their moral evaluations have in common? Now, listen again. Now, this doesn't, I am not getting you to guess what the historical figure here is, but what is the institution in society throughout all of history that sounds like this? What would their moral evaluations have in common? Probably a pessimistic mistrust of the entire situation of man will find expression. Perhaps a condemnation of man together with his situation. The slave is suspicious of the virtues of the powerful. He is skeptical and mistrustful, keenly mistrustful of everything good that is honored among them. He would like to convince himself that happiness itself is not genuine among them. Pause there. Who does that sound like? Or more appropriately, what institution talks that way? The church. You could see Jesus' teaching sounding like this, or even better, the writings of Paul in the New Testament. What is the church constantly saying? People are evil and corrupt. You cannot redeem yourselves. You need help from God. All of us are depraved sinners since the fall of man, and we are all doomed to hell. What are the bumper stickers? Not of this world, right? The idea is this place is terrible and doomed, and there is no hope for us here. Now, notice. So what are the origins here? There are some good origins of this slave morality that we'll get to in a second. But right now are the origins that I hate. I love slave morality, except I hate its original idea. What is the original idea? Resentment is what Nietzsche loves to call it. The idea is not that slave morality has its own morality, has its own ideas of good and bad. It is just a reaction to the powerful. It is just the slave saying, what, you masters think that you are good? Well, you cause suffering, so you know what? You meanies, you're bad. The origin of slave morality is a rejection of master morality. Master morality comes first. Slave morality is defined by its resentment for the masters. And that's the part I hate. For instance, in churches, what do you hear more about? Sin or goodness? Sin. What do you talk more about? Who and what will go to hell and how people are living the right way? Or goodness and telling everyone to help everyone? No. People of slave morality are more prone to resentment than they are to actually promoting goodness. Oh, here's another example. Let me show you that churches, people, societies like ours are very motivated by this idea of resentment, right? Let's think. I am trying to think about this famous book that had a lot of influence on other literature. Everybody's familiar with the book. It's even in video games. It was by Dante. Let's see. Dante wrote a famous book. What was it called? Dante's... You're right. Dante's Inferno. Nerds. That's actually incorrect. We think the book is called Dante's Inferno because that's the only part we care about. Do we read the other parts of the book? Paradiso about heaven, or Purgatorio about the purgatory where people who can work hard and try to make their way to heaven? No, we don't care about that garbage. We don't want to hear stories about people doing well or working hard and redeeming themselves. We want to hear stories about powerful people suffering in hell. The book is actually called Divine Comedy, but everybody thinks it's called The Inferno because we only like the part that's about resentment, about seeing powerful people suffer. That's the point. Slave morality is about resentment for the powerful, and we love things like Dante's Inferno. We love church services that talk about all those terrible people going to hell and how they are not actually happy but miserable, about how celebrities are really all rapists and pedophiles. We love those stories. We love powerful, happy people being brought down. So read further, right where I left off. On the other hand, those qualities which serve to make easier the existence of the suffering will be brought into prominence and flooded with light. Here it is that pity, the kind and helping hand, the warm heart, patience, industriousness, humility, friendliness come into honor. Now pause here, because you're starting to notice something about the comparison. In master morality, where would you put humility? That's of the disgusting, bad, lower peasant class. The lower peasant class, the masters look at Jesus and say, "You fool, why are you poor? You are disgusting." If you have humility or pity, that's because you're weak. Weakness is a sign of badness in master morality. So now notice what happens in slave morality. You are suffering and oppressed, and here is the part of it that I like. The other side of the origins of master morality, fill it in your chart. One part of it is resentment, but the other part of it is, how do we survive when we're so oppressed? What do we have to do? We have to care for one another. So, the slave morality values that are going to get promoted and flooded with light are taking care of one another, being compassionate, showing pity for others, sharing, being a hard worker. Now, pause there, another tangent. Does master morality praise hard work? Not really. The goals of master morality is have other people work for you. To sit around and post pictures on Instagram of how wealthy you are, not how hard you work. It's a fun tangent. So continue. For here, these are the most useful qualities and virtually the only means of enduring the burden of existence. Slave morality is essentially the morality of utility. Here is the source of that famous antithesis, good and evil. Power and danger were felt to exist in evil, a certain dreadfulness, subtlety, and strength which would not admit of contempt. Thus, according to slave morality, the evil inspire fear. According to master morality, it is precisely the good who inspire fear and want to inspire it, while the bad man is judged contemptible. So notice we're jumping back and forth. So what makes you good in slave morality? Good in slave morality is now actions. What sort of actions? Actions of helping one another cope and survive. So sharing, caring, pity, humility, what do you want? People that aren't proud, but people who are lower themselves and be kind to one another, who see others' misery and do something about it. So what makes you bad in slave morality? And now the overall moral of the story is becoming clear. What makes you bad in slave morality? Acting like those pompous jerks that are the good in master morality. What is bad in slave morality? Showing pride. Being greedy, being selfish, not caring about one another, but acting like those disgusting masters. So what do you find? And here, let's get our chart and do the quite obvious thing. So look at your chart, and now it's pretty obvious what's going on. Master morality is invented, and then what does slave morality do? Sorry for the beautiful graphics. They simply reverse the values. What the slave morality considers good and bad are the opposites of what is good or bad in master morality. And so, what are the conclusions you are supposed to draw from this? Now, please note, in the background, what Nietzsche is saying is our moral values are just social conventions. They are just people who have power or who have say saying, we're good. What is master morality? We people who have power are good. What is slave morality? We slave people who are humble and try to help each other are good. You are bad. Morals are just complete fictions of people trying to get other people to agree with them and give them more say and more power. That's all morality is. This is what Nietzsche meant by the will to power. And so we get to my favorite question. Which are we as a society? Here is what I like to think of. Let me give you a scenario. Let's pretend that you are driving out in the middle of nowhere. There is no city around, just out of the middle of nowhere in western New Mexico or something. And your car breaks down. And you have no cell phone signal. Now, let's imagine two different scenarios. Let's imagine while you're sitting there out in the middle of the night, you see someone walk up to you who is wearing just a white old t-shirt. They have baggy jeans, right? They have a big beard like this one, right? And you see them walking toward your car in the middle of the night like this. What are you thinking? Now notice what's happening. You are thinking, I am going to die. We have a basic instinct, like the master morality people do, of saying poor people are bad. You could say that part of the reason why people seek wealth, think back to Smith, for example, part of the reason people seek wealth is they think wealth makes you good. Not just that it makes your life easier, but that wealth will gain me respect, because people do not think poor people are good. They think they are bad because they have a lot of this master morality. Now, try the second scenario. You are out in the middle of nowhere, and now a fancy car pulls up, and a nicely dressed guy gets out. What are you thinking? Now, of course, some of you are thinking, uh-oh, I'm going to be raped. But most of you are thinking, okay, let's see if this guy can get me some help. You don't immediately think he's as big of a threat. Why? Because he's of the master morality type of class. Try another scenario. I think it's a basic truism that when people get dressed up, they dress up as the people they want to be. Well, when you are going to a fancy place, what do? You dress up like the master class. You say that you want to be a good person, that you emulate Jesus or Mother Teresa or Gandhi. Really? Do you dress like them when you go to parties? Do you post photos of yourself on Instagram, poor and dirty? No. You're imitating Beyonce and Jay-Z and NBA players when you get dressed up, because that's who you want to be. Burn. The other way we could say this, if you wanted to try to find a scapegoat, because as far as I'm concerned, it seems like societies like ours practice only master morality. But you could try to find a loophole and say that in our public lives, we are master morality people, but in our private lives, maybe we're slave morality and we actually care about one another. Because, think of this, in your public life, what is your major? In your public life, what careers do you want to have? Do you want to have careers like Jesus and Gandhi and Mother Teresa? Very few of us, right? No, you want to have a career that will bring you what? Status, wealth, and power. So, pretty hard to say that our society encourages slave morality. I think we talk that way, and maybe we teach it to our kids, but if your kid says, you know what, I want to devote my life to the poor. I am going to go feed poor people and be poor myself. We will probably slap our little kid and tell him to go become a lawyer.